Hello everybody, my name's Oliver and I'm the writer, photographer, and general lunatic behind 23gt.net. You may know me from such articles as One Shade of Grey and Godzilla vs. the Banhammer. Normally, I stick to the written word and still photos, so this is my first attempt at a video travelogue. Please excuse any newbie mistakes. This first video is about the Prince and Skyline Museum in Japan. No, it's not dedicated to a certain musician who loved purple and frills. It's about the Prince Motor Company and its most famous mall, the Skyline. But Skyline is a Nissan model, isn't it? You're probably saying. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But it was initially a model adopted from Prince when the two companies merged in 1966. The GT-R badge that made the Skyline a legend among gearheads came in 1969 when the model was already a Nissan, and since then the names Nissan, Skyline, and GT-R have become inextricably linked, like other famous combos such as bacon, lettuce, and tomatoes, or bubbles, blossom, and botulism. I hadn't actually heard of this museum until shortly before my trip in June. My side trip to Japan was supposed to be just 2.5 days long, but I had to add another day unexpectedly. So I started searching for some car-related things to do, and found an article mentioning the museum on japancarculture.net. There wasn't much info online about the museum, but a few reviews on TripAdvisor made it sound interesting. It'd be a long trek outside Tokyo to get there, but I figured it was a good excuse to see more of the Japanese countryside and enjoy the wonders of Japan's rail network. The museum is located in a small city called Okaya, in Nagano Prefecture. To get there from Tokyo, my trip started early with a train ride to Shinjuku Station, where I got a ticket for the Chuo Line Limited Express Azusa. And here's Azusa. She's not exactly pretty, but she's a nice, dependable girl. A 2-hour, 20-minute train ride followed, that I whiled away watching the scenery go by, and pretending I could read the pamphlet in my seat pocket, that appeared to be about how the Chuo Line made possible the love triangle of two middle-aged lady hikers and a young Tokyo salaryman. Or at least, that was my best guess, since I can read Japanese about as well as I can read ancient Sumerian. We pulled into Okaya Station, and then I had to figure out how to get to the museum. Google Maps said it was only about 1.8 miles away, so I thought about just hoofing it there. But with limited knowledge of the area, I chickened out and took a taxi. I'm sure glad I did, because as it turned out, the museum was in the middle of a large park on top of a hill. You can hear how the driver had to rev the snot out of the engine to get up some of the steep inclines. After about 10 to 15 minutes, he dropped me off in front of a courtyard and pointed me to a map. From what I gathered, he couldn't get closer to the museum than this, but it was supposed to be a short walk from there. Of course, I managed to head off in the wrong direction at first, but it wasn't so bad. The park was really pretty, and I couldn't think of a nicer place to get lost in on a cool, drizzly morning. Eventually, I found the right direction. Basically, you just have to keep climbing until you get to the top of the hill. And there I was, in front of the Prince and Skyline Museum. The museum itself is divided into two main levels. The first floor, which is where the museum shop is, along with several display cases of memorabilia and collectibles, plus the first car on exhibit, a 1967 Prince S50D, which is the second generation of Skyline. Admission was a very reasonable 1,000 yen, or about $10. Heading down a large staircase lined by some very cool pencil sketches of various skylines takes you to the main exhibit hall. The main attraction here, of course, is all the cars. But in addition, you have a bunch more display cases with die-cast models and more vintage memorabilia. You'll also see several engines and various parts on display. Now, it would be impractical for me to cover everything in the museum in detail during a short video, so I'll just hit some of the highlights. And if you want more info, please check out the accompanying article I posted on the blog. Hit the link in the video description. Starting off, we have this beautiful trio of Hakasukas, plus a Ken Mary, representing the third and fourth generation of Skylines. The Hako, of course, represents the first generation of GT-R. In the corner was this tasty and rare 1964 Gloria convertible, followed by other examples of the Gloria, including a nice black first-gen model. Last in the row was a cute little Prince pickup truck. Speaking of trucks, in a little garage on the side was this 1965 Prince Light Miler, and behind it a 1974 Prince Homer. Yeah, I said Homer. No! Of course, it wouldn't be much of a Skyline Museum without pristine examples of the RB triplets, including a sweet R34 V-Spec 2 that had me drooling. Tucked into one corner, you'll also find a small movie theater. When I visited, it was playing footage from Japan's Super Silhouette series. Yeah, that's the one with the insane R30 silhouette racer, made famous for Gran Turismo. Race cars, of course, occupied pride of place in the center of the museum. There was a trio of cool R32s, but I was particularly interested in the blue one, because it was the first of the 560 Nismos made, making this the eldest sibling to the one in my garage back in the States. This 8th generation of Skyline would of course be the one the Aussies would dub Godzilla for its all-conquering race performance. It's interesting how the R32s look pretty close to the road-going models, but far more removed from stock was this Japan GT R33 run by Autobox Racing Team Aguri, or ARTA. The team run by former F1 driver Aguri Suzuki is now affiliated with Honda, but back in 1998 they had this mean R33. The back row of cars started off with an ALSI-1, the very first generation Skyline, followed by some second-gen cars, then a 6th-gen R30 2000 Ti, a 5th-gen C211, aka the Skyline Japan, and lastly, looking a little forlorn with a flat tire, an R30 Paul Newman version from 1983. Legendary cars have to have legendary engines, and so there was this display of various Skyline power plants through the years, culminating in the beastly RB26 DETT. Beside that motor were two prime examples of cars that wielded it in battle on both the racetrack and the Wangan. Two black badasses, an R33 and an R34. Another R34 lurked nearby, but it was the more sedate EC-R34 sedan version. Beside that car was one that we Americans don't think of normally as a Skyline, because it was sold in the States as the Infiniti G35. In Japan, though, it was the 11th generation, known as the V35, since the R35 code would be reserved for the GT-R that would debut in 2008 as a separate model. If you've played Gran Turismo since the old PS1 or 2 days, then you'll know the name Tomikaira. They used to be one of Japan's most famous tuners, likened to European luminaries like Ruf and Jambala. This car wasn't one of the rare Tomikaira Rs based on GT-Rs, but a more normal M20 based off an R32 GTSD, but still very interesting. Behind the M20 was a fine example of a very 80s looking R31 GTS-R, just perfect for crashing Radwood. And that covers the cars on display. Like I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of other items to check out, from various OEM and aftermarket parts, to posters and car club badges, to a huge collection of Tomica and Koro-Q model cars. In case you're wondering, yes, there were some R35 GT-R items mixed in, even though Nissan had split it off from the main Skyline lineup. Heading back up the stairs, there's still a lot to check out in the museum shop. Not only did they have a ton of Skyline and Nissan related items for sale, but they also had several other displays in cases and on the walls. On the back wall, they had these fantastic hand-drawn sketches from various events and get-togethers. I did a little shopping, and it was hard limiting myself in what I bought. And then it was time to leave. Before going though, I had to check out the awesome view from the back of the hill the museum sat on. I took some time to savor the crisp air and the majestic view of Lake Suwa that spread across the horizon. Leaving the museum presented the one big snag of the trip that I ran into. As far as I could tell, there was no bus route through the park, and it was isolated enough that getting a taxi was highly unlikely. That left me having to make the nearly 2-mile hike back to the train station. At least it was downhill, and I'm an avid hiker. Despite that, my feet weren't on friendly terms with me by the time I got back to the station, since I'd been standing for hours already in the museum. It was a huge relief to sit down and grab a tasty ekeben or train station box lunch before catching my next ride. The easiest way to get back to Tokyo would have been to ride the Chuo line again, but I had a second objective on this little jaunt. I wanted to finally ride Japan's famous bullet train. With that in mind, I hopped the train to Nagano City. After waiting a bit and resting my tired dogs in the Nagano Station's sweet waiting area, it was time to board the Hokuriku Shinkansen and tick another thing off my bucket list. And that ends my little travelogue. I hope you found it informative and entertaining. Please check out the blog, and I hope you'll keep an eye out for my next video when I visit another little-known Nissan museum, the Nissan Guest Hall and Engine Museum in Yokohama. Until then, drive safe, everybody.